The left will concede that the pandemic caused learning loss. However, the evidence suggests that learning loss is far worse than it should have been because the Democrat politicians and their teacher union allies kept schools closed far longer than what was necessary.
The way the brain works, it doesn't work in a way where learning is lost. That implies that you need to go find it. That implies that it's somewhere that it can't be located. Learning doesn't happen at a period of time in a vacuum and then you move on and then you can't get it back unless you go find it. It may have been disrupted, yes, because we experienced a trauma that is unprecedented in world history. And that's a word that no one has used up until this point. Trauma. There is another pandemic that has been going on since the beginning of American history. And that is the underinvestment and disinvestment in poor schools, in poor communities, particularly black and brown. The trans community isn't bothering you. Let them live. Why are Republicans so uncomfortable with this? Let them be who they are. That's it. They're not bothering you. They're not taking your lunch money. They're not criminalizing your communities. They're not engaging in gun violence. They just want to live and be happy like everyone else. And they are contributing members to society, whether it's through education, sports, the economy, or anything else. When we invest in education, we invest in shared prosperity from rural America to urban America and everything in between. Imagine a nation where every single child, regardless of learning style, background, race, had access and opportunity to the American dream. When we invest in education, we have better health care, economic, and obviously education outcomes. We deal with the issue of public safety. We deal with the issue of mass shooting. We deal with the issue of mass incarceration. Invest in our children, invest in our schools. Let us stop neglecting this critical area. Much, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to discuss my amendment to the Fiscal Year 24 National Defense Authorization Act Rules Amendment number 778. My amendment is very simple. It would reinvest $157 billion from our defense budget into our public education system. Now, many of my colleagues may balk at that number. However, I want to remind everyone that we spend more on our national defense than the next 10 countries combined. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, to the House chamber and to America, education, I argue, is the #1 national security issue in our country. We need to invest in this space in order to save our democracy and take it to our next level. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back. We have an ugly history of discriminating against people who are different than we are throughout our time in this country, whether they are black, Latino, Asian, LGBTQ, poor, people with disabilities, women. We have an ugly history of discrimination in this country, and now the trans community is the target. What the heck who are we as Americans and as a human race to be so darn uncomfortable with an individual or group of people that's different from who we are? From the beginning of American history, as we got our stuff together, as we tried to, we invited people from all over the world to help us build the nation that we have now. And we continue to try to evolve into the nation that we're capable of being. And no one should be left out of that, especially not the trans community, which is the most vulnerable community right now in our country. Ms. Jayapal already shared some of the data, as did Ms. Bonamici, and as did Mr. Takano. I just want my Republican colleagues to just take a breath, stop, relax. The trans community isn't bothering you. Let them live. Just like you want your friends and family to live and have freedom and have rights and have choice, let the trans community have the same thing. Before I get started on my questions, I just want to start with this simple one. And this is to everyone in the chamber, not just to our witnesses. Raise your hand if you lost someone due to COVID or you know someone who lost someone due to COVID. Raise your hand. Okay, that's like the whole chamber. Okay. COVID killed 1.135 million Americans and counting. That's more Americans that were killed during the Civil War and World War II combined in a shorter period of time. Let's say we would have kept the schools open. Isn't it likely, yes, kids were not as harmed as other people, but kids are taught by teachers who may have some immunocompromised situation going on. Kids go home to parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles and live in the community and travel. So while kids may have not been seriously sick or killed by COVID, they can pass the illness on to others who will then die from COVID. This is well documented. That being said, I think it's fair to say if we would have kept schools open, more people would have died due to COVID. So we're talking here about learning loss, which is the incorrect term, by the way. The more correct term is learning disruption or disrupted learning. We need to invest in our teachers, invest in our children, and invest in our schools and communities that have been historically neglected. And I'll close with this, and Ms. Ray, I'm going to try to give you a moment to respond to my comments. I'm sorry I went too long. But I don't know where we're getting this idea of this disrupted learning is going to lead to generations falling behind. I have a doctorate in educational leadership from Manhattanville College. I ran a middle school for 10 and a half years. In 2016, my middle school had the #1 growth scores of any middle school in New York City. We moved kids from level 1 to level 3 on standardized tests at a higher rate than anyone else in New York City. We did that in 1 year. Why are we talking about generations? We need to have a conversation about how learning works and be honest about that in this committee. And I hate standardized tests, by the way. We need project-based learning and more holistic learning in our schools that includes the arts and sports and tech and things that kids actually care about and actually contribute to a 21st century economy. Sorry, my time is up. I yield back.